Next.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hope everybody's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. We have our Angie back this morning. Good to see her. And I hope we got some people watching on Facebook this morning. I hope my daughter and son-in-law are up and down this morning from the sunny south. Been trying to figure exactly how to start this morning's lesson. The name of the lesson this morning is Peter's Denial. And we know in the last couple weeks we had talked about Jesus at the Last Supper with his disciples, and that he was trying to explain to them what was going to happen in the next day, next 4 days, I guess. And they couldn't quite understand, because in their mind they were still expecting him to be a conqueror of the Romans, not knowing the order of exactly the events that were going to happen, and that they weren't going to happen how in our minds we think that Jesus would come to do. He spoke to them at the Last Supper, and then we remember we studied the next week that he went to the garden to pray, because he was, this was a thing that was a very torturous thing that was about to happen to him in his human body form. And remember how, Jesus was anxious and he was ready, if there was any other way to do what he had come to do, then he was ready to hand it back to the Lord and say, you do it. But we remember that this was the only way that somebody had to pay for our sins, and that he laid himself down to do it. They didn't take him, he laid himself down to do it. And that's the one thing that we need to know, that Jesus did this willingly. It seems, when we're reading the Bible and they send all these guards and these men, he didn't have to let that happen then. That was an easy thing that he could have stopped. But he was willing to go through the torture for us, and he let himself. And it was prophesied in the Old Testament that these things were going to happen. But we remember that even the leaders of the time, who were the people that was after him, they were very well versed on the coming of the Messiah. But there was so much pride and so much self in them that they didn't want a Messiah to come and take away the positions and the bit of authority that the Romans had given them. They were happy with that. So, and then we recall Judas. We talked about him, that he was at the supper, and the Lord had told him that night that there was somebody was going to betray him. And as he went around, the disciples were asking, is it I? Is it I? And we remember that Judas, he went through that supper just like the rest of them. He had walked with Jesus just like the rest of them. And he had the chance to back up right then. He hadn't done anything. And, Jesus had called him out, and he had that opportunity, but he was more into the money. That he was the treasurer of the group, so he was really interested in money that he could get. And then during that time, when he brought the Sanhedrin and the thugs with their clubs to take Jesus, and he kissed him on the cheek, if we remember, so they would know, because they didn't know exactly who they wanted to get the right man, because Jesus had been followed by crowds, if we remember. And then because it wasn't time for Jesus to die, he had slipped away from them before this. So they needed to make sure they got the right man, because, he was surrounded by his disciples. And we remember that Peter, when they came to take him, that he drew his sword out and he sliced off one of the soldiers' ears, and that Jesus quickly put that ear back on, because that could have started, a whole other chain of events too, just them getting back at Peter for doing that, and the violence that would happen. But Jesus quelled that really quick during that. So today we're going to talk about Peter. Peter we know he was one of the disciples called by Jesus. I want to look at a couple of verses about him before we get started. in Matthew, and there's lots of mentions. I only picked out a few so we would have time, but wanted to kind of just get a little background on this man that we're talking about this morning. So I'm going to look at Matthew 4, chapter 4, verse 18. And this was when Jesus was first beginning his ministry. It says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. So we see Peter is not one of these high priests or not somebody of high standing. He was a fisherman. He provided food for people. And Jesus came and called him. And the key to this, to me, at once they left their nets and followed him. So even from the beginning, Peter, he was a go with Jesus kind of guy. He didn't question. He didn't want to go home and get his clothes or whatever. He's ready to go with Jesus right then. So, I want to kind of look at the character a little bit of Peter. Second, I want to look at Matthew 14, verse 22. We're kind of like the last week when Jesus was on trial that we talked about how they took him in the middle of the night. They were all waiting on him, and then he didn't get a fair trial, that they didn't give him any witnesses. They just put witnesses against him. So this morning we're going to give Peter a fair shake. We're going to get some look at his character and figure out who he is before we start the study. So Matthew 14, verse 22. This was after Jesus had been teaching and feeding the 5,000. The people were gathered around him, we remember. And it says, and immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of them to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So they're trying to get themselves away from this crowd. They're tired. They've had a full day. And in verse 23, it says, during the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down on the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, crying out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? So we see Peter in another situation of life. Jesus is walking on water, and I had read that back then, if they thought they saw ghosts or stuff walking out on those lakes, and they saw Jesus, and the first thing they thought, was it's a ghost, because what man do we even know now that can walk on water? But, so Peter said, if it's really you, tell me to come to you. And Peter got out on the water and walked toward him. And he started to doubt and sink. He started to look around at the world around him, and he sank in time. But he did have the spunk. It doesn't say any of the other disciples did it. Peter was kind of a go get 'em kind of guy, and he was going to go out there and try it. He didn't quite make it. He fell short at the time, but he got out and tried. And sometimes, if we look at ourselves, if I say this right, my mom would say, can't never could do anything, can, tried, and did.
Well, he walked all the way to him, and then when he got there, he got scared.
Indeed.
That's
So-
what.
So he was able to keep the faith for a while, and then it kind of...
And him right there, ready to grab him. There he done made it, and then he just went.
And Bill said he lost his focus. He kind of, we see it as when Peter doing that, he's kind of a headstrong, go with your feelings, kind of get her done kind of guy. We look at Matthew chapter 16, let me see, verse 18. Jesus is talking to the disciples again, and he says, he's asking them, who do people say that Jesus is? And Jesus says, but what about you, he asked, who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus Christ. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So we see a glimpse ahead of Peter. He's not there yet, as we know, but Jesus is confirming to him that you're my disciple, and that I will, my kingdom, and you will be one of the cornerstones of my kingdom. So Jesus is encouraging him and kind of foretelling his future that Peter has no idea right now. But Jesus this is a confirmation to him, who, he still doesn't truly understand everything that's going on. One more place I wanted to look at is Luke 22. And this one is kind of scary, I think, to all of us, because it's kind of true for all of us. We're looking at the Last Supper, and as we study the Last Supper in Matthew, but this is Luke's account, so a little bit we talked about the Gospels a lot of times tell us of the same event, but it's according to the man of how he writes it and the things that he noticed on that. But as we're looking at Luke 22, verses 31, and as I said, they're at the Last Supper, and Jesus is trying to explain to them what the events that are going to come forward now. And in verse 31, it says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your body, strengthen your brothers. So we're looking here when Jesus was giving instructions to his disciple. It says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. So Satan wants to sift all of us as wheat. And at times, if you've been a Christian long enough, you've been sifted many times over. And he told Simon this. And this was part of what's happened to Simon, as we see in these things. Satan is after him hard. We see, sometimes you'll see Christians that are really strong, and some really bad, hard events start happening in their life that makes you kind of think, why is this happening to me? I'm trying to live. Satan, the people that aren't Christians, aren't disciples of God, Satan already has. But the ones he wants are the people that are. And, he's going to go after every one of us to try to sift us as wheat. And, he knows, the Bible talks about our armor. He knows where we have holes in our armor, and he's going to go after them. So, this is a little backstory of who Peter is, of who Christ has told him that he is capable of being, and that Satan is after him right now. Satan had asked him to give him Peter to sift his wheat. So we'll finally get to the lesson. Quit talking and get to it. So the golden text for this morning comes out of 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12. It says, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. So we can't be too built up on ourselves. We are human still, and we're subject to get haughty and prideful sometimes when we think we're standing too tall. It says, wherefore he that thinketh he standeth, take heed lest he fall. And the lesson name says, watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation in the morning, which no man should discard. And we remember in the lesson last week, Jesus, reminded these men of that. He had asked them to watch and pray with him, and they weren't able to do that. So he was really reminding them that part of your strength comes from this. The lesson, in part of the introduction, a couple things. It says self-confidence invites temptation. Our loyalty to Christ may call us into difficult places, but then we should recognize that they are difficult and pray for grace that we might walk circumspectly in them. So sometimes because of being a Christian, you will get in difficult circumstances that you need the Lord. But also we need to be careful of what circumstances we put ourselves into. He doesn't put us into all these circumstances. I've heard over the years people talk about it. If you have a problem or an addiction or something, and you're real fired up for Christ, and a lot of times people, when they're new Christians, they want to go back and tell their friends because they don't want them to go through what they have. And sometimes you get back into that situation and you're surrounded by these things, and it draws you back out of that. So, you have to be really careful at where you are in your Christian walk, how strong you are to do this, and probably have brothers and sisters with you when you do it, because there's strength in numbers of that. So we need to be careful of these things. So we'll start reading the verses. We're looking at Matthew 26, verse 31 through 35 first. It says, "Then said Jesus unto them, All ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. But after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. Peter answered and said unto him, Though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, that this night before the cock crow thou shalt deny me thrice. But Peter said unto him, Though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples." So the first verse where it said in verse 31, "Then Jesus said to them, All ye shall be offended because of me this night, for it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flocks shall be scattered." We've talked about this before. Hindsight's 20/20, and that's what we have. We have the Bible of all these events told both when they happened and after they happened. These disciples didn't have that. Jesus tried to the best of his ability to explain to them what was going to happen. But if we think back to this and somebody was telling us of some of the events, we wouldn't be able to fathom really what's going on and what's going to happen. And Jesus is telling them, that this night, because of these events, that ye shall be offended. So he's saying, that you're not going to be able to withstand this, and you're going to be really confused when it's over. Once this happens, you're not going to know exactly what is going on with it. And it says in verse 22, "But after I am risen again, I will go before you in Galilee." So he's foretelling the events that's going to happen that we see happen in the book of Acts, but that, as we say, they don't have this book that we have. So they really don't know exactly what he's telling them at the time. They're there, and he's trying to get it. Yeah, where is he going? And that, they don't even know if for sure if he's the king, is he going to die? It's just really kind of, you just think of how it would be kind of going around in our mind of what is he trying to tell us. It says, "Peter answered and said unto him, Though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended." So if we think of what we just talked about with Peter, He's pretty headstrong. He leaps before he looks sometimes. He doesn't think it all out. And some people need to do this. Sometimes, you know, you can sit around and think and look too much and not do action when you really should have been going for that. But Peter is declaring that I am, you know, if everybody else leaves you, I won't do this. Verse 34, it says, Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, that this night before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. Wonder what Peter's thinking when the Lord's telling him that. He's pretty prideful and boastful still at this point, and he has just chopped off the ear of that guard, so he's pretty froggy right now, and he's thinks he's going to do it, but Jesus is saying, you will deny me before the cock crows 3 times tonight. Verse 35, it says, Peter said unto him, Though I should die with you, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples. So all of them have kind of chimed in now. Peter has once again said, no matter what happens, I'm your man. If it takes the death of me, I'm your man. So he's made a pretty strong statement. And then in this verse it says, likewise said all the disciples. So sometimes we look at this and just think of Peter and kind of judge Peter's actions or what he thought. But at this point, according to Matthew, they all chimed in and they vowed their bravery and that they would stand by him during this period of time. So not just Peter as we blame it on him sometimes. Okay, let's go back, and our lesson's going to take back up at Matthew 26, verse 69 through 75. Let's read over that. It says, Now Peter sat without in the palace, and a damsel came unto him, saying, Thou also wast with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. And when he was gone out to the porch, another maid saw him, and said unto him that were there, This fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. And after a while came unto him they that stood by, and said to Peter, Surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech betrayeth thee. Then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crowed. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, which said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. So in verse 69, they have taken Jesus, and it says, and Peter was without the palace, and the damsel came to him, Thou wast with Jesus of Galilee. So he has followed Jesus to where they're taking him, and he's kind of in the courtyard gallery, and somebody recognizes him thinking that they had seen him with Jesus before. And it's just, it calls her a damsel, so it's not one of the Sanhedrin, or it's not one of the soldiers, it's not somebody with a sword. It's just like me or you saying, Aren't you? I've seen you before. Yeah, aren't you Peter that was with Jesus? And it's in verse 70 it says, But he denied before them, saying, I know not what thou sayest. First, we need to go back that we didn't mention. It says Peter was without in the palace watching, and another one of the Gospels in this talks about John being in the scene. But all these other disciples that had vowed, I will be with you. She didn't say, haven't I seen all you guys before? So you kind of want to look at Peter and think of the things he's done. But he did stay around. He wasn't back in the Lord like he had said, but he was staying around and being behind him where the other disciples aside from John, it really doesn't mention that they're out there. So we got to give Peter a little thought for that. His heart was in the right place, but his feet couldn't exactly stick there with him. Sometimes we're brave when the big bull charges after us, but we're going to run too. So that's where he is. In verse 70 says, but he denied before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. In verse 71 it says, and when he was gone into the court, another maid saw him and said unto him that were there, this fellow was also with Jesus. So somebody else, he's apparently pretty recognizable in what he's done. He's been with Jesus since the beginning of his ministry. And it says a maid saw him. So again, we see that it's not somebody that's of great fear to him that he thinks, is going to immediately take him and kill him at that time. And at verse 72 it says, and again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. So this is the second time that he's denied any, can't think of the word, that he's with Jesus, a friend, a disciple, or, that he doesn't even know him at this point. And we talked about this a little bit last week, the people that have had to make professions of faith or die, that we can sit here in this church this morning among fellow believers and we can say all these things that they've done. No matter where you go, I'll go with you, I'll go. But until we truly get to that place and we get in that situation, and you can be real prideful and boastful of like Peter, of what I will do, but until you get there, you don't know what you'll do. And without the Holy Spirit, you're for sure gonna, there's no doubt of what you're gonna do without that. We had talked about I guess when I even think of that, the first thing that enters my mind is we talked about the school shootings out in western Kentucky when all that started, and the little young teenage girl that would not deny Christ in front of him, and she died for him. And that is something to be said for a person, and like we said, and a teenager who has all the trials and tribulations and young in life, but that her faith was strong enough that when she came face to face, she didn't fail at this.
Rhonda, when I was studying that lesson, I thought Rhonda was a friend of ours from years ago in Indiana. He made the remark, and something I won't be specific was, he said, if I backslide, I'll never do that, even if I backslide. That's strange to me. But when he backslid, first thing he did, or one of the first things he did what he said he wouldn't do. I mean, I know we have to have a determination, but we can't do it without the Lord.
No.
We can't do it. Without the Spirit of God, we can't do it.
And some of the things we vow not to do are some of the hardest things for us. That probably was something that was difficult for him, and like you say, without the Lord, you can't handle some of these things.
I think that's what fear was. It was in himself. He was thinking, I'll never do that. But if we're not following the Lord close and listening and obeying Him, we don't know what we would do.
Right.
Therefore, he prayed, you could pray and read the Bible.
Right.
Yeah. And Jesus had already warned them when they were at the garden and when they were sleeping. He said, watch and pray. And he was talking, that night he wanted them to watch and pray with him. But then he kind of expounded that, to make it through this life, you have to watch and pray. Because when you give up, as we had talked about earlier, that Satan was waiting to sift Peter, and he's waiting to sift all of us. If he gets that opportunity, he is for sure going to take it. And especially when we're not ready and not watching and praying that these things not happen. And in verse 73 it says, and after a while came unto him they that stood by and said to Peter, surely thou art one of them, for thy speech betrayeth thee. So these are just, it doesn't tell exactly who they are, but it's another group that's out there in the courtyard while, you know, the trial is going on and while they've taken Jesus. And they're looking at him again, you are the guy with Jesus. And they even said, you know, you can't decide because you've got a foreign speech to what we have, you know. You're a Galilean, you're not from here. And, you know, he's kind of, I guess if this keeps happening, just imagine when the first time somebody says that, you're like, no, I don't know him, and you think, I got past that. And it's happened again to him, the maid, and now it's happened again. It says, came unto him they that stood by. So apparently it looks like this time there was kind of a group that was standing, hanging out that, you know, may have been talking about it. It's like, you know, let's go over there and ask him. And that really has to make you kind of paranoid once that happens. It's kind of going up a little level.
What they were saying to him was, you're a northerner.
Yeah. Yankee.
He didn't say that.
Yeah, it's like, and in verse 74 it says, then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crowed. So he not only denied him the other two times, I'm not the man, but this time it says he begins to curse and swear. So he kind of, if I always, and I like reading better than watching a movie or whatever, because you get in your mind exactly, you know, and I can see him just really, you know, the temperature going up, and he probably flailing his hands and cursing and swearing and telling them to get away from him, and he didn't know that. That's exactly what he did. It kind of pushed him over the edge, it looked like, because it didn't mention that he cursed and swore any time before this. I want right now to veer off just we'll read the last verse and then we'll veer off just a little bit. In verse 75 it says, and immediately the cock crew, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus, which said unto him, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. So Jesus had already told him this was going to happen. And you wonder during the time that it was happening, was he thinking, I denied him? Or that it didn't dawn on him what Jesus said until he kind of, after he cursed and swore, and he kind of cooled down from his Yankee attitude. Sorry, and I don't mean anything but Yankees. It wasn't until right at that time, then it dawned on him that it's been 3 times. And then when he heard that rooster crow, it really had, that's what brought it in. But I wonder during the first time that he denied him, did he even think of what Jesus said? Or did it not come to him until he heard that crow and then he remembered that's what Jesus
On the other
said?
hand, he might not have been trying to draw attention to himself. He's probably wanting to see what they're doing to Jesus and stuff like that.
And he was kind of writing it off too.
Trying to write it off. He didn't know that he was really denying him at the time, but he was.
And that's a good point.
And he really didn't set in to the cockpit crow. Then he's thinking, oh my goodness, I did deny him.
I did do.
He's probably thinking like I was going to deny him to his face or something like that.
Yeah, and exactly how, and I guess that is true, that the whole picture didn't come in until what Jesus exactly said happened to him about the cock crowing. So and we do that. I mean, if you think of it, we might do something that's not exactly, and we can kind of change the scene, and in our minds, no, I didn't do that. You said I was going to do
Peter
this.
probably didn't think he was going to deny him that kind of way.
Yeah, and
Why, the maid asked him if he wasn't one of them, that he was with you. And then the third time it says after a while, and they stood by and said, surely thou art one of them, without speech betrayed. So, That was pretty plain, that was 3 times.
It, yeah, yeah.
But when you got the maid asking, he wasn't one of them. And then the first one asked him the same thing.
And it's kind of building on him a little bit. It's one person, then a group starts wondering about him, what he's done. I wanted us to look at Luke chapter 23.
Rhonda, it says, verse 75, it says, with the crowing of the cock, the Lord turned round and from the chamber facing the court looked upon Peter, singled him out of all the crowd, showed that amid all his suffering and sorrows, he had not forgotten. So Jesus singled him, just to...
That's just what I was about to read, and yes, that's exactly what.
And I think that really...
Yeah. And the NIV version that I have, it says, the Lord turned, and this is in Luke, the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter, and Peter remembered the words. So, this man you have vowed never to forsake, he's done that. But then, you think of it, if you promised Patty that, I'll help you and I'll take care of you and I'll fix salsa for you whenever you get low on it, and you don't do these things, and if you see somebody's knowing eyes looking at you, hard to get past that.
She does have them eyes sometimes. I'm kidding.
I can tell from up here.
I'm kidding.
But that kind of sealed the deal at the time, that he knew what he had done, and it says that he went out and he wept bitterly because of it. So Simon has had, as we've read in his life, he's had some good, hard lessons, hopefully learned. And we had talked about before, sometimes if you don't try to do something, you're never going to get anywhere. You might try and fail, but if you never try, you're never going to be any different than you are. The Lord tried to give him instruction. He couldn't quite take it at first, but as we see later in his life, he did, and especially with the Holy Spirit's help. After Pentecost, we knew that he was a strong man of God. And then we go back to where I had read when we first started about Jesus telling him that you are the rock. And he became that person. He wasn't that person here, but he did become that person. And, that's the thing for us. We're hopeful. We're not all that we can be as we go through life. We hope to become closer to Christ and stronger and to be able to do things. And you think even now, related back to when you very first became a Christian, things that were so hard, temptations that were so hard for you, that maybe now aren't a big deal to you, that you became closer, you became a stronger Christian. So now you're able to withstand some of the things that really would have rocked you from the beginning. And like Patty was talking about, the man that had, and that was probably being something that was very hard to deal with. But as long, the more time you're with Christ, the more strength you build to things that were hard. And Satan's always sure to put something else out there to try to make you stumble. But, with Christ, we can overcome these things and continue to grow. Anything else y'all wanted to add?
Where I do think, if you want to, you need to pray over and read your Bible, and because if you don't, Satan, he's not after the ones he's already got, he's after you.
Yes.
If you, it takes the Lord to help you.
Yeah. And he, like you say, the people that are close to Christ, it's not like he's not gonna try to tempt you. You know, you have him, but Christ won't leave you, but you have to be sure to stay by him and keep your eye focused on him.
You need him to take care of
Yes,
him.
yeah. And especially, it seems like nowadays, stuff is just so crazy that you can't even keep up with. It's like it's confusing, crazy, the way it is, and you don't know. Sometimes you don't know something's happening until after you're pretty enmeshed in it, and then it gets really bad. And that's kind of what happened to Peter, we see. It doesn't seem like he really fully understood what was going on until the end, and then he saw. And he wept bitterly. He knew at this time, versus, when Jesus even called out Judas, we were talking at the supper, and, he could have wept bitterly and said, I don't know what I've been doing and why I'm in this thing and change, but he didn't have a change of heart like Peter. Sometimes your heart gets so hardened that even, that look of Jesus wouldn't have fazed him. But Peter meant what he said. Sometimes his feet just couldn't stand at the time. So we're ready to answer a few questions before we end. Janet's been awful quiet this morning.
Do I need to wake her up?
You all got it cut.
It says, what warning did Jesus give to Peter?
That he will be mine.
He's kind of warning him that you're not quite where you think you are. It says, how did Peter feel about his own strength?
He thought he would be all right, but
He thought
he
he,
would die.
yes. And all the other disciples also said this. It says, what is the danger in confidence in ourselves?
Trust the Lord. You think we can do it.
With that confidence, we don't necessarily need the Lord, do we?
Because it comes to the Lord.
Yeah, and like people with finances or high education, sometimes they're pretty self-sufficient, don't need to humble themselves.
Let him that stands, be careful lest he fall.
Yes, absolutely, because we're all apt for that. It says what things led to Peter's downfall. And it says, and how did Peter's first sin lead to worse sins?
Denying the Lord.
Lost trust in the Lord, in Jesus.
They were confused, they didn't know what was happening, They thought he was gonna come build the kingdom and overthrow the Roman government and, and ride on a white charger and, do those things. So they were kind of confused about.
Actually, he lied. That's what he actually done.
He kind of got worse, that he lied, and then he started swearing, and so he kind of escalated. The situation got worse and worse. It says, why does one sin always lead to a worse sin? Or nearly always.
He kind of
It keeps,
One sin covers the other.
and kind of like lying. I try my best not to, because I have a terrible memory, not just because I have a terrible memory. But when you start lying, then you gotta remember the lie, because when you lie next time and somebody starts questioning about the lie, you gotta remember the circumstances that you.
That's your right.
I have a hard time remembering the truth that actually happened. Sometimes if I don't tell it again, it's not because I'm lying, it's because I really don't remember. But my husband says, never call me as a witness for it.
When you get older too, though, you can't remember things. One of them is not just that, but usually I can remember everybody's name. Yeah, I can see the person, can't think of his name.
Me too.
Not old age.
I always said my dad was my memory, and when I lost him, I don't remember anything. So don't expect it. Peter convicted of his sins, and we'll go ahead and do the last one since we're going to, and it says, what should we do also when we are convicted?
Seek forgiveness.
Ask the Lord. Pray.
Admit it, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, that you've done something. But, you know, he doesn't expect us to be perfect. You know, we need to strive every day to be perfect, to be better than we were the day before. Well, thank you all for all the input. Does anybody have anything to add to the lesson or any?
I'm always amazed at the long suffering of Jesus.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, you sit and watch all the things we do that he doesn't destroy us or didn't when we were doing them. And he gives us opportunities, so thanks. All right, thank you all.